Most people who fail in terms of performance are not lazy at all. They are working themselves to the point of self-destruction. They do more than necessary, think more than they can bear, and call that trying hard. But the harder they try, the more distorted their performance becomes. There are days they work like crazy, and days they are completely paralyzed. There are periods of intense breakthroughs followed by straight falls to the bottom, not because of a lack of ability, but because all their energy is burned up on one single thing, forcing themselves to maintain peak performance. Every day begins with an internal interrogation. Do I still have enough focus today, enough motivation, enough determination to endure one more day? When performance depends on emotion, the results become something unrepeatable, unpredictable, and uncontrollable, and that is what kills them. Not the volume of work, but the fact that every single day they must recreate the ready-to-work state from zero. Meanwhile, there exists an entirely different kind of performance, one that makes people uncomfortable just witnessing it. There are people who don't work frantically, don't talk about hustle, don't appear to be trying their absolute hardest, yet their output always arrives on time. They finish work every day. They make progress every week. Their performance doesn't explode, but it almost never collapses. Their success looks effortless, not because the work is light, but because they don't waste energy on self-forcing. And this is the contradiction very few people dare to face. If superior performance doesn't come from trying harder, but from the ability to produce stable output every day, then perhaps everything you were taught about effort, motivation, and discipline from the very beginning was wrong. In a place that doesn't measure effectiveness by inspiration, doesn't believe in fleeting willpower, people have built a different formula, a formula that makes high performance the default state, and success merely the unavoidable byproduct. Chapter 1. People believe that trying hard is enough. The story I'm about to tell begins with a man named Daniel. He was diligent, ambitious, and always believed that if he hadn't achieved what he wanted, it was simply because he hadn't tried hard enough. His days started early and ended late. His schedule so packed there was almost no room left to breathe. Tasks piled on top of each other, goals followed goals, and inside his head there was always the familiar command, must be better than yesterday. Daniel read productivity books, listened to discipline podcasts, tried every new time management method that appeared. Each new system promised to help him focus more, do more, move faster, and each time he believed that if he could just find the right tool, everything would be fine. His core belief was very simple, and also very common: just try a little harder. One more hour of work. One more detailed plan. One more squeeze of discipline when the body is already tired. One more push through procrastination. But that very belief began to erode him day by day. Daniel's mind never stopped running. Even when he wasn't working, he was still thinking about unfinished tasks, incomplete goals. His focus became fragile, brittle. There were days he worked extremely efficiently, completing many tasks in a row, followed immediately by empty days where he sat in front of the screen for hours producing almost nothing worthwhile. Burnout didn't arrive as a clear collapse. It accumulated quietly, slowly, until exhaustion became the baseline state of his life. Overthinking became a habit. Every small decision drained energy. Every morning began with convincing himself he still had enough strength to keep trying. Every evening ended with the feeling of not enough, not finished, not deserving rest. The irony was that from the outside, Daniel still looked fine, still working, still progressing, still seen as responsible. But inside, he was in constant battle with himself, not with deadlines or competitors, but with the quiet resistance every time he had to start something familiar. The small climax came in a very ordinary moment, with no big drama, no obvious failure. Just another morning when he sat in front of his to-do list and realized he was tired, not because the work was hard, but because he had to force himself to do things he had already done hundreds of times before. For the first time, Daniel stopped and realized the problem was not in his ability, not in his discipline, and not in his effort. What was breaking him was having to use willpower every single day to fight against himself. And if he kept believing that trying hard was enough, he wouldn't collapse immediately, but he would slowly burn out without ever understanding why. Chapter 2. The Japanese principle everything began to change when Daniel came to Japan, not with the expectation of discovering a success secret, but simply because work brought him there for a period of time. From the very first days, he felt something was off, in a very uncomfortable way. Everything operated with extreme precision. Trains arrived on the exact minute, doors opened on the exact second, people appeared in the exact place at the exact moment, as if pre-programmed. There was no flexibility he was used to, no space for spontaneity. His days began and ended according to a fixed rhythm, and what frustrated him most was that no one felt the need to explain it. In this place, people didn't ask whether he felt interested in the work, didn't ask whether he was passionate, didn't even ask whether he was motivated or tired. Work was simply done, repeated, in the correct order, at the correct time, day after day. Small rituals appeared everywhere, the way of greeting in the morning, the way of starting work, the way of ending the day, all of them so familiar they were boring, and that very boredom made Daniel uncomfortable. In America, he had been taught that choice is freedom, emotion is the compass, and motivation is the fuel. Here choices were narrowed, emotions were set aside, and motivation had almost no place. Instead there was schedule, behavior, repetition without discussion. Daniel felt as if he was being suffocated inside a frame that was too tight. He felt stripped of the right to decide very personal things, when to do it today, how to do it, in what mood. Every morning waking up in Japan, he didn't need to ask himself whether he wanted to work, because that question simply didn't exist in this system. At first he resisted silently. He felt more rigid, less flexible, and strangest of all, he no longer had the feeling that he was trying hard. There were no familiar bursts of excitement, no inspiring work days, but there were also no complete crashes. Everything flowed evenly, coldly, and that very fact made him anxious. Daniel began to compare, even unintentionally. In America, every day was a negotiation with himself, a chain of small decisions that drained energy, work or rest, focus or procrastinate, push harder or give up. In Japan, those negotiations disappeared. The schedule decided for him. Behavior was preset. He just had to step in and do it. The initial feeling of being deprived of choice made him uncomfortable, even angry, as if someone was taking away the last bit of freedom he clung to. But at the same time, something else began to emerge, very slowly, very faintly. His mind became quieter. Less thinking, less struggling. He no longer had to convince himself to start, nor blame himself when he didn't reach a perfect state. Work didn't need him to believe in it, didn't need him to feel right. It only needed him to show up and repeat what had been predetermined. Daniel didn't realize it immediately, but he had been forced to live in a completely different rhythm. A rhythm that required no inspiration, no motivation, no promises to himself. A rhythm where the system didn't care what you thought, only whether you were present. And from that very moment, even without understanding why, Daniel had stepped into a cycle that didn't require him to believe in it, yet it continued to operate, day after day. Chapter 3. When the system starts thinking for you, Daniel woke up at the same time every day, not because he wanted to, but because the alarm rang and everything around him began moving at exactly the right moment. There was no question, should I get up early today? No familiar negotiation with himself. He got up, prepared, went out, entered the new day following a preset sequence. Work was the same tasks, the same order, the same pace. No change, no optimization, no creativity, just repetition. At first, Daniel found this emptiness unbearable. In America, he was used to feeling like he was trying hard every day, feeling progress, needing motivation to start. Here there was nothing to hold on to. No one praised him for effort. No one asked if he felt interested. Everything happened as if his emotions were completely irrelevant, and gradually something strange began to happen. He realized he no longer waited for inspiration to act, not because he had become stronger, but because the system didn't give him the opportunity to wait. Wake up, do, time come, start. End point, reach. Stop. No negotiation, no procrastination, no self-persuasion. Inspiration began to disappear, but not in the terrifying way he once feared. It simply became unnecessary. Motivation too. The mornings full of determination, the explosive work days he used to be proud of gradually vanished. In their place came a steady, flat, almost emotionless state. Yet at the same time he still acted. Every day, never missing a session. No reason needed. Daniel began to notice very small but very clear signs. His mind was quieter. The overlapping streams of thought, the hours-long internal debates gradually fell silent. He no longer wasted energy deciding things that had already been decided. His body was less tired, even though the workload hadn't decreased. The familiar exhaustion, the kind that came from forcing himself to focus, began to recede. Work began to flow, not dramatically faster, but more consistently, more reliably. Tasks that used to require mental preparation now simply got done. Daniel realized something that both relieved and unsettled him. He no longer thought much about whether what he was doing was right or wrong. The system had decided for him what enough was. In Japan, people refer to this state with concepts he had once skimmed over but never fully understood. Kata, behavioral patterns repeated until they no longer require consciousness. Raphael G, continuous, uninterrupted practice, where value lies not in emotion but in maintenance. Shu in Shu-hari, the stage of clinging tightly to the form, where the individual is required to disappear so the behavior remains intact. Daniel began to understand why this system didn't need him to believe in it. It didn't persuade. It didn't explain. It simply existed and kept operating. And when he showed up long enough, consistently enough, precisely enough, a silent transformation occurred. He no longer had to think about whether he should do it, how much to do, whether today would be effective. The questions that once consumed most of his energy disappeared, not because he had answered them, but because the system didn't allow them to exist. Daniel realized he was changing in a way very hard to describe, not becoming instantly better, not becoming happier, but becoming more stable, less volatile, less affected by internal states. He no longer felt like he was trying to become someone. He was simply carrying out preset behaviors, day after day. And within that very monotony, a realization began to form. His performance no longer came from conscious effort. It came from the system taking over the hardest part for him, thinking. For the first time in a long while, Daniel understood the core truth he had never seen before. The problem had never been a lack of discipline or motivation. The problem was that he had placed the entire burden of thinking, deciding, and self-forcing on himself. Here, in this cold rhythm of life, the system had taken that burden for him, and when the system thinks for you long enough, you no longer need to try hard in the old way. Chapter 4. Effortless is not easy. It is the absence of hesitation. The difference didn't appear as a clear breakthrough. It revealed itself slowly, slowly enough that Daniel only noticed it in hindsight. While those around him still talked about finding motivation, about uninspired days, about needing rest to recharge energy, Daniel had already finished what needed to be done before those conversations even began. Not because he worked faster, nor because he worked more. He simply didn't stop midway to negotiate with himself. His days were no longer fractured by invisible gaps where people usually procrastinate, overthink, then self-blame. He showed up on time, did the right thing, stopped at the stopping point. No more, no less. And that very consistency created a very uncomfortable distance when compared. Others still struggled with the question, do I have enough motivation today? While Daniel no longer had any reason to ask it. He didn't need to want to work in order to work. Work had become part of the rhythm of life, just like waking up or going to sleep. The strange thing was that his emotions were never intense. He didn't feel happier than before, not more excited, no sense of victory when finishing a workday, but he also no longer felt the deep exhaustion of the past. His state was flat, stable, almost emotionless, and that very emotionlessness made him hard to break. Bad days no longer pulled him backward, because his performance didn't depend on whether the day was good or bad. Daniel began to see success arriving in a very different way. No breakthrough moments, no inspirational stories, just results accumulating gradually, projects completed on time, More responsibilities entrusted. Trust from others increased, not because he was eloquent, but because he was always there. Success came as a side effect of stability, not as a reward for pushing beyond limits. Daniel understood why from the outside everything looked effortless, not because he was living an easier life, but because he no longer wasted energy on invisible hesitations. Effortless, in this system, didn't mean not working. It meant no longer having internal arguments before each action, no longer needing motivation to start, no longer needing emotion to sustain. The things that once made him believe he was trying hard had become redundant. He no longer needed to prove anything to himself. What made Daniel pause wasn't the results, but the realization of the internal change. He looked back at how he used to live, work, and believe he had to continuously push himself to move forward, and realized that gap no longer existed. Not because he had become stronger, but because he had become someone else. Someone who no longer needed to convince himself to act. Someone no longer dependent on mental state to sustain performance. And in that moment, Daniel understood that what had changed wasn't just how he worked. It was his very identity. He was no longer the old person who had to fight himself every day. He had stepped into a different state, where action happens before thought, and results appear without needing to be chased. Chapter 5. The price of stability. Daniel didn't wake up each morning feeling happier than before. There was no greater joy, no deeper fulfillment or pride. If he were honest, he rarely even thought about his emotions anymore. But precisely because of that, his life was no longer chaotic like before. His days were no longer dictated by mood, by erratic ups and downs, or by long stretches of procrastination. Everything happened steadily, on rhythm without needing rescue. Daniel looked back at his old period and realized the difference wasn't in the level of effort, but in the level of fluctuation. Before, he lived in a continuous chain of emotional reactions, where every day was a small battle, where performance had to be wrested through willpower. Now that battle was gone. But at the same time, so were the peak moments. This stability came with a clear price. It took away intense feelings, days full of excitement, emotional explosions he once thought necessary for a meaningful life. In their place was a flat, even cold state, where everything was controlled by structure rather than personal desire. Daniel received no comfort from this system. It didn't promise happiness. It didn't care whether he liked his current life or not. It did only one thing: kept him operating. And when he looked straight at that, he understood this wasn't the path for everyone. Not everyone is willing to trade emotional freedom for unbreakable stability. Not everyone wants to live in a rhythm where showing up matters more than feeling right. Daniel didn't give advice. He didn't call for anyone to choose like him. He simply posed a question each person must answer for themselves. Do you want emotional freedom, with all the chaos that comes with it? Or do you want a stability that no mental state can break? Because in the end, success is not about becoming the best, nor the happiest. It is the result of whether you can still stand when your emotions no longer stand with you. And if there is one cold truth this system forces you to face, it is this: you don't need to become the best. You only need to become the person who no longer negotiates with themselves. If you want to understand more deeply the thinking systems and performance frameworks that most people never get to see, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next stories. See you in the next video, where we will continue to unpack the truths that make success look effortless.